The smell of coffee filled the air as I made my way down the stairs, the aroma pulling me out of my grogginess. I stretched, feeling the stiffness in my muscles, still half asleep after a decent night's rest. "Morning, everybody," I called out as I walked into the kitchen. As I passed by the stove, I gave Jessica a quick kiss, barely noticing the steam rising from the pot. "Dad!" My son's voice rang out, and before I knew it, he had jumped out of his chair and was rushing over to me. It never failed to make me smile. Stefan was a bundle of energy at 4 years old. I scooped him up and spun him around, much to Jessica's dismay, who was trying and failing to get him to sit still long enough to finish his breakfast. The look she gave me told me it was time to put Stefan back in his chair. "How'd you sleep, buddy?" "Good. Danny came to visit me last night." "Ah, so Danny's still around, huh?" I asked, trying to sound serious, but failing. "His name's not Daniel, Dad. It's Danny," Stefan said with exaggerated disbelief, like I had said something completely ridiculous. "Oops, my mistake. So, how's Danny these days?" I said, making sure to emphasize the name correctly this time. Jessica shot me a look that said I shouldn't encourage Stefan's new imaginary friend, but I couldn't see the harm. After all, Stefan was just a kid, and what 4-year-old doesn't make up a friend or two? We just moved into a new house, in a new town no less, so I figured this was his way of adjusting to all the changes. The move to Willow Creek had happened out of the blue. My job offered a transfer along with a promotion that was too good to pass up, but it meant we had little time to adjust to the new place, especially for Jessica and Stefan. "He's okay," Stefan said with a shrug. "Just okay? What happened to the Danny I know? Did he have any good stories for you?" "Not really," Stefan said, absent-mindedly scooping up milk with a spoon. Just stuff. I repeated, amused. "Yeah, he said he doesn't like you." I gasped, clutching my chest in mock distress. "What? Danny, you're breaking my heart." I tickled him, and he erupted into laughter. "Well, I guess I'll have to make a better impression at your birthday party next weekend, so Danny will see I'm not so bad after all." Stefan snickered and then casually added, "That's silly, Dad. Danny can't come. He's dead." At that, the spatula Jessica had been holding slipped from her hand and clattered onto the stove. We locked eyes, both of us caught off guard. "After a beat," I asked, "you said Danny is dead?" "Yeah, he's been dead for a long time," Stefan replied, like it was no big deal, as he spooned another bite of cereal into his mouth. "Mom, can I go play in the garden now? I almost finished my bowl." Jessica looked a little distracted, but she nodded. "Yes, but make sure to take your bowl to the sink first." "Yes, Mom," Stefan shouted as he grabbed his bowl and bolted for the sink. He ran out into the garden without even looking back. I watched him disappear out the back door, still processing what had just been said. "So, what do you think that was all about?" I asked Jessica, my voice filled with uncertainty. "I'm not sure. It's pretty unsettling, don't you think?" she replied, a hint of worry in her voice. "Yeah, it really is. I don't get how he could have made up something like that. Do you think there's any truth to it?" Jessica shot me a look, half amused, half incredulous. "You're seriously asking if there's a ghost haunting our house, and it's visiting our son at night? You really think that? You don't believe in ghosts?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Of course not. It's all nonsense. You don't actually buy into that, do you?" "I don't know," I said, taking a moment to think. "There's so much we don't understand about the world. Who's to say there's nothing after death?" She went back to flipping the egg she was making. "That's just ridiculous," she said dismissively. "You've said 1,000 times that it's just an imaginary friend, right?" She glanced back at me with a questioning look. "Right?" I muttered, not fully paying attention anymore. My mind was somewhere else now, staring out the window as I watched Stefan play in his sandbox. Maybe I should just stay in Stefan's room tonight. Check to make sure there's not some weirdo sneaking into his room while he sleeps. Seriously? Don't you think that's a little much? What's the harm? It's a Friday night, and Grandma Sue would love to keep him for a sleepover. They can binge-watch Paw Patrol and stuff him full of popcorn and cookies. Meanwhile, you can have a relaxing night in the bath with a glass of wine and a good book. She rolled her eyes, but I could tell she was intrigued. "This is ridiculous," she said, though her tone wasn't convincing. "Come on, a quiet night to yourself sounds pretty nice." She gave me an exaggerated eye roll. I knew I had won. Fine. But if Grandma Sue is busy, we're calling it off. Just as I expected, Grandma Sue was thrilled to have Stefan for the night. She picked him up early, and Jessica and I had a nice, quiet evening with takeout pizza and cheap wine. I sent her off to soak in a bubble bath while I kicked back with some ridiculous alien show on the History Channel. By 11 p.m., I was feeling drowsy and ready to call it a night. After changing into my pajamas and brushing my teeth, I announced to Jessica with my best creepy voice, "Time to go commune with the dead." She was already in bed, absorbed in her book. "Have fun," she mumbled, barely looking up, and blew me a distracted kiss. I left the warmth of our bedroom and shuffled down the hall into Stefan's room. I flipped the light on and took in my surroundings. The pale blue walls were decorated with a big mural of a clown grinning at me. I couldn't help but shudder. Why on earth did Jessica decide on a carnival theme? There was nothing creepier than clowns. I walked over to Stefan's small bed with its striped comforter. My legs dangled off the edge, but it'd do for one night. I crawled under the covers and clicked off the elephant-shaped nightlight. The room was instantly swallowed by darkness, except for the dim red glow of the nightlight shaped like a circus tent. That glowing light made the clown look even more sinister. How had I never realized how creepy this room could be at night? I turned away from the clown, doing my best to settle down and calm my mind. I was jolted awake by a strange creaking sound. For a moment, I was confused, unsure of where I was. Oh, right, Stefan's room. I rubbed my eyes and glanced around, trying to locate the source of the noise. The closet door in the far right corner was slightly open. Hadn't I closed that earlier? Stefan's tiny backpack was swinging gently from the doorknob. "Hello?" I whispered tentatively. "Is anyone there?" Nothing but silence. I turned to my right, and my gaze immediately fell on the godforsaken clown. I really needed to talk to Jessica about that. The nightlight still cast its eerie red glow, making the room feel dizzying. I scanned the rest of the room. Stuffed animals in the corner, a bookcase by the door. "You're not Stefan." The voice was so faint, I wasn't even sure if I had heard it. "Who's there?" I whispered toward the closet. Again, silence. This was getting ridiculous. I was just a grown man, lying in a tiny bed next to the creepiest clown in the world. I threw off the covers, about to swing my legs out of bed, when I heard it again. "You're not Stefan." I froze. No doubt about it this time. I had heard a voice coming from the closet. Slowly, I turned my eyes toward the dark opening of the closet. In the dim red light, I saw a small, pale face. Only the upper half of the face was visible, dark, hollow eyes, a grayish forehead, and messy hair. The face stared at me, hanging high in the closet like a child standing on tiptoe behind the wall. "What the hell? Who are you?" I stammered. The face didn't move. The eyes hadn't blinked. "Are you Danny?" I asked. At the mention of the name, the face abruptly vanished, and I heard a scratching sound coming from the closet. "Where is Stefan?" The voice was now louder, rougher, and filled with an unmistakable anger. "He's not here," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady. "What do you want?" There was a long pause before the voice came again, softer this time, but still chilling. "Want? Stefan." I was frozen in place. "You can't have him," I said, raising my voice, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped, and the air crackled with tension. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Before I could speak again, I saw something shift at the bottom of the closet. The pale face was back. Only this time, it was clearer. The face was that of a child, but wrong. Sickly, almost skeletal, with sunken eyes and dark circles. Its lips were too pale, twisted into a disturbing grin. But it was the teeth that made my stomach churn. Tiny, sharp, jagged teeth, as if they had been intentionally broken to form a grotesque grin. The chin rested directly on the floor as the face glared at me, radiating an anger I'd never seen from any child. It stared for a few seconds before the creature began to move. "No, eslite." Its limbs stayed tight against its body as it slithered across the floor, its voice growing more sibilant with each whisper. "Want Stefan? Want Stefan?" I backed up as far as I could until my back hit the headboard of Stefan's small bed. The creature kept coming. Its head and shoulders soon disappeared from view as it glided under the bed. I gripped the mattress, my heart pounding in my chest. Sweat beaded on my forehead. I could feel the mattress shift as the creature grabbed the springs beneath it, like a deranged animal. The springs creaked under the pressure. Slowly, I saw tiny, jagged nails appear on the side of the bed. I'd always heard people talk about being paralyzed with fear, but I never thought it was real. But here I was completely unable to move, forced to watch in horror as another hand joined the first. I squeezed my eyes shut, not wanting to see that thing any longer. And then I heard it. "Michael? Michael, come back to bed. This is ridiculous." The lights clicked on, and as I opened my eyes, Jessica's figure came into view. "Michael? Are you okay?" I stared at her for a moment, then whipped my head back toward the side of the bed where the creature's hands had been just moments ago. Nothing. I let out the breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Är fine, ikrokt. Everything's fine." She looked at the spot where I had been staring, but seeing nothing, she continued, "Come back to bed. I can't sleep without you. It freaks me out being alone." She turned and walked out, her robe trailing behind her. I waited, listening intently. All was silent. Tentatively, I lowered one foot, then the other to the floor. I stood up, fully expecting to see a small, ragged hand reaching out from under the bed to grab my ankle, but nothing happened. I couldn't bring myself to look under the bed. The thought of seeing that horrible imitation of a child again made me sick to my stomach. So I turned and walked out of the room, shutting the door behind me. Back in our room, with Jessica snuggled up beside me, sound asleep, I lay awake for what seemed like hours. That face, that child's face, kept replaying in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that any moment I might wake up to cold, bony fingers tightening around my throat, or hear that sinister whisper slithering from the shadows. Somehow, I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, the sun was shining through the cracked blinds, and the annoying chirp of birds outside the window yanked me from the remnants of my nightmare. Groggily, I rubbed my eyes and tried to make sense of the craziness that had happened the night before. I couldn't let Stefan go back in that room. Not with that thing still hanging around. No way. I had to figure this out. I had to protect my son. I reached under the bed and grabbed my old laptop, the one that had been collecting dust for who knows how long. It took forever to boot up. Technology was a cruel joke sometimes. Finally, when it was up and running, I opened the browser and got down to business. How to get rid of ghosts. The cursor blinked at me, mocking my desperation. I deleted it quickly and tried something more specific. DIY exorcism. Yeah. No. That was a bit much. Cleansing spirits from your home. That was more like it. I hit enter, and after scanning through a bunch of results, I found a few articles that seemed promising. Hours later, I had a plan, and I had a name, Daniel Ward. Turns out, our house wasn't just old, it had a history. A tragic one. In 1907, a little boy named Daniel Ward had died here, consumed by tuberculosis, as I found out in my late-night research session. It was gut-wrenching to know that a child had suffered so much in this very house. But what really got under my skin was that he was still here, still trapped in this place. Whatever happened to him had twisted him into something far beyond a child. My thoughts were interrupted when Jessica peeked her head around the doorframe, her voice cutting through my dark musings. "What are you doing in here? You've been on that thing all morning." "Nothing," I muttered, slamming the laptop shut before she could peek at the screen. "Just browsing." She raised an eyebrow, a knowing look flashing in her eyes. "Okay," she dragged the word out, clearly sensing I was hiding something. Yeah, she was definitely onto me. I needed to steer the conversation away from whatever was going on in my head. "Hey, I was thinking, maybe you could use a little break? You've been so stressed lately, right? How about I ask Grandma, Sue, to keep Stefan for a few more hours? You could go get a spa day, get pampered." Her eyes lit up. "Seriously? I thought you thought those were a waste of money." I forced a smile, hiding my true feelings. She was right, I'd always thought spa days were a total ripoff. But I needed her out of the house. I couldn't risk her being here when I was doing what I had to do. "Nonsense, you deserve it," I insisted. Go ahead, give them a call. I'll make sure Stefan's all set with Grandma. Jessica's grin spread across her face. Well, in that case, you don't have to twist my arm, she said before hurrying downstairs to book the appointment. I couldn't help but cringe at the thought of how much this little gesture would end up costing me, but I shoved the thought aside. I had a much bigger problem on my hands, one that couldn't wait any longer. I was going to do what needed to be done. I was going to get rid of Daniel Ward, whatever it took. According to everything I'd read, the best time to do this cleansing was at night. But I didn't have a luxury of waiting. I couldn't let this thing linger any longer. I immediately called my mom to see if she could take Stefan for a few hours, just long enough to give me the space I needed. Once we settled on a time for her to drop him off, I rushed to get dressed and headed downstairs. Hey, I've got a couple errands to run. I'll be back soon, I said to Jessica, who was still lounging on the couch. Sounds good. I'm off to the spa in about half an hour. They had a last-minute cancellation for a deluxe package. How lucky is that? I stifled a groan, but forced a smile. Yeah, that's awesome. Enjoy yourself. With my keys in hand, I made a beeline for the door. 45 minutes later, I walked back into the house, bags in hand. Jessica's car was gone, so I didn't bother calling out for her. It was just me and whatever else was still lingering here. I carried the bags upstairs and pushed open the door to Stefan's room. The red curtains were still drawn, and the space felt as eerie as it had the night before. The weather had turned stormy, and the dim light filtering through the curtains gave the room an unsettling, dreary feel. I shivered involuntarily. Shutting the door behind me, I dumped the contents of the bag onto the floor. I stopped for a moment to survey my supplies. A sage-smudging wand wrapped in cloth, an abalone shell, a feather, a container of coarse salt, and a Bible. I pulled out my phone and pulled up the article I'd been obsessively reading over the past few hours, double-checking my steps to make sure I had everything right. First, I grabbed the salt and sprinkled a line across the bedroom door. This was supposed to stop whatever was in here from wandering into other parts of the house during the cleansing. I wasn't sure it would do anything, but I wasn't about to take chances. Next, I set the abalone shell on top of the Bible. The Bible wasn't part of the original instructions, but I figured it couldn't hurt. Again, no risks. I moved to the window and pulled back the red curtain. The rain was coming down hard now. I cracked the window open just enough to avoid drenching Stefan's floor, but enough to create an escape route for whatever needed to leave. I pulled out a lighter, flicked it to life, and held it against the tip of the sage wand. The little flame danced in the dim light, and soon the end of the wand was glowing red. I blew out the open flame, and the wand continued to smolder, sending thick, earthy smoke swirling into the air. Dropping it into the abalone shell, I picked it up along with the Bible and grabbed the feather in my other hand. I was ready. I started pacing the room, waving the feather through the air to send the smoke drifting in every corner. The thick, musky smell started to fill the space. I circled the room twice, silent, letting the smoke permeate every inch of the place. When I completed my third lap, I spoke. Daniel Ward, I command you, in the name of God, to leave this house. You are not welcome here. Go. I paused, holding my breath. Nothing. I kept walking. Daniel Ward, I command you, in the name of God, to leave this place. You are not welcome here. Leave now. Still nothing. I tightened my grip on the feather and started again. Daniel Ward, in the name of God, I command you to leave. That's when I noticed the shift. At first, everything seemed the same. But then, the rain outside stopped sounding so loud. It was as if something was pressing down on the air, thickening it, making everything feel heavier. I could hear the quickening of my own pulse, the thudding of my heart in my chest. Daniel, in the name of God, I command you to leave. A loud thump came from the closet. I froze mid-step, staring at the door. The closet was half open, a sliver of darkness spilling out from it. Daniel, I command you in the name of God to leave this house. Another thump, and then so soft I could barely catch it, a low hiss like someone forcing air through clenched teeth. The hiss was followed by the unmistakable sound of scratching, sharp, jagged claws dragging across wood. Daniel, I command you, in the name of God, to leave. You are not welcome here. The hiss grew louder. Then came the voice, barely audible, but undeniably there, moaning, rasping. Don't! The word hung in the air, dragged out with a sickening, breathy rasp. Daniel, you need to leave now, I shouted, my voice rising in urgency. Don't! The voice was louder now, the rasping becoming more distinct. And then, from the darkness of the closet, the gray, bony hands appeared, clutching the doorframe. Michael. The word slid out of its mouth, twisted and guttural, my name distorted in that eerie voice. I could feel the bile rise in my throat, my skin crawling. I couldn't back down. Not now. Daniel Ward. In the name of God, I command you to flee this house. The thing slowly emerged from the shadows, a twisted, gray figure with mottled skin that seemed to ripple with each movement. Its dark eyes were wide, frantic, desperate almost. Don't! It rasped again, the words weak and pleading. I didn't respond. I couldn't afford to. With every slow, painful movement, the entity crawled closer, its sharp nails digging into the wood as it dragged itself forward. The thing's gray skin smoked faintly as it moved, the air around it thick with dark mist. It glanced up at me, its large eyes searching mine, begging for mercy. Don't! It repeated, but I couldn't feel sorry for it. Not after everything. As it reached out with one of its smoky hands, I could see the wisps of smoke swirling from its fingers. And then, without warning, it dropped to the floor, its body crumpling in a heap. The air grew still, and the smoke swirled around it. With a final whisper of sound, it was gone, vanished through the open window, swept away by the storm. I stood there, frozen, for a few moments before my knees finally gave out beneath me. It wasn't until that exact moment that I realized how much the cleansing had drained me. My body felt like it had been wrung dry. I wiped a bead of sweat from my forehead as I gazed toward the empty closet. It was over. That evening, Jessica and I settled on the couch, each with a glass of white wine in hand. I hadn't said much when she got home, and she, feeling totally relaxed from her day of indulgence, didn't press me for conversation. I wasn't sure I'd ever fully process everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. I wasn't even sure I wanted to, but at least my son was safe. That thought alone brought me some peace. I took a long gulp of the sweet wine and sank back into the soft cushions of the couch. The doorbell rang, and before I could even put my glass down, I heard the sound of small feet rushing through the hallway. Dad! Mom! Stefan burst into the living room and threw himself at us. We both laughed and pulled the little guy into a hug as he rambled about his weekend at Grandma's. He was talking a mile a minute, so I could barely catch every third word. From what I gathered, they had a blast, cookies, games, and an endless supply of junk food. My mom strolled into the room, moving at a slower pace. Geez, Stefan, give your parents a second to breathe, she said with a laugh. I'm going to see Danny. I can't wait to show him the new puzzle Grandma got me. Stefan squealed, already bounding up the stairs with excitement. Before I could respond, he was gone, his laughter echoing through the house. My mom shook her head, a fond smile on her face. He couldn't stop talking about Danny all weekend. I gave her a tired smile. Well, I don't think we'll have to worry about Danny anymore. Jessica shot me a sideways glance, her eyebrows raised in curiosity, but I didn't acknowledge it. You won't believe this, my mom continued, settling down on the edge of the chair next to the couch where Jessica and I were still lounging. When I asked him about Danny, he said he was dead. I froze. Jessica gave me a sideways glance, a little uncomfortable. I know, Jessica said softly. It's kind of creepy. Yeah, my mom agreed, her voice taking on an uneasy tone. He said that Danny was his friend, and that Danny protected him from the others. My heart skipped a beat. I snapped my gaze toward my mom. What did you say? My mom paused, seeming unsure of how to continue. Well, I tried to press him, but he clammed up. He told me that the others in the attic were mean, tried to come down and hurt him. He said Danny wouldn't let them, that he kept him safe, and then he wouldn't talk about it anymore. A chill swept down my spine. The others? My mind raced as the cold, rasping voice of Danny echoed in my head. Want Stefan. Want Stefan. Suddenly it all clicked. Danny hadn't wanted Stefan. He'd been trying to warn me. It was the others who wanted him. The ones in the attic, the ones I'd heard whispers about. Danny had tried to help, tried to protect my son from whatever was lurking in the darkness. I set my wine glass down a little too roughly and grabbed the blanket from my lap, my heart pounding in my chest. Just as I was about to stand up, I heard it. My son's screams, high-pitched and full of terror, tearing through the air.